Well, welcome to episode 5 of The Reign of Terror, which is one of 2 episodes that we, as we record this commentary, don't actually have access to. And we're going to find out why, and I'm going to introduce 2 gentlemen who are experts in the field of missing episodes of Doctor Who, and they are...
I'm Paul Vanezis.
And I'm Philip Morris.
And so tell us, guys, why we've come to you. What's your background in the history of, and the future, indeed, of tracking down missing television?
Well, from my point of view, I got first interested in the idea of recovering lost episodes when I found out that so many were missing. I think the Doctor Who magazine printed an article in their winter special in 1981, and I was really horrified when I saw the list of episodes that had survived and the ones that weren't surviving, and I was quite distraught about it, really. I just assumed that everything had been kept. I think a lot of people felt the same way, and it was just a real shock. And so slowly we discovered round about that time, 1982, 83, we discovered episodes. They were started to come back, and that really got me fired up, because once I'd discovered that everything had been lost, I sort of I thought, well, that's it, they're gone now. But then things did start to come back, and that really inspired me. So I used to write letters off to TV stations all over the world, hoping that some episodes might turn up.
What about you, Phil?
Well, I first came to the world of Doctor Who around about 1971, I think it was. It was John Pertwee, Mind of Evil. I think I must have only been about 3 years old at the time. Became a fan straight away. I loved John Pertwee, right the way through to all of the Tom Baker years and into the early 80s. And probably when I was around 8 years old, like everyone of probably my generation, we used to buy the Target books. And, we realised that other people had played Doctor Who before John Pertwee. And I found these to be great stories. I used to buy them all the time. As you do when you're younger, you always want to collect the full set, and, it's got to be complete. And I thought, one day we'll get to see these on television. We'll re-show them, and we're going to see them on BBC Two or something like that in some, slot somewhere else. We'll get to see these. And exactly the same as Paul, really. I used to get the Doctor Who Weekly in I think it was 1979, if anyone can remember that far back. You can?
Yeah, yes.
Well, basically, I also remember getting that issue of that magazine, which basically said at the time how many episodes were missing from the archives, and it was kind of unbelievable that that they didn't have a full set of episodes, which you'd taken for granted that they were always away stored somewhere and ready for everyone to watch.
But now you've come to understand the process that the BBC went through in junking material. A lot of people write it off as cultural vandalism, but at the time, was there a practical necessity for them to be doing it?
Yes, there definitely was. I mean, general hindsight, as they say, never won a war. It's you've got to look back at these things in the time they were done. The BBC didn't have a great deal of money. There was, these things were shown. They were then, shown overseas and sold overseas. And once those rights had expired, we were entering into, the era of colour television, which was, I can remember getting a colour television back in 1970, and it was the most exciting thing, because I can tell you now, the first thing I ever watched in colour was the John Pertwee title sequence, the way it changed from the green to the orange, and it was it's like watching 3D television now, the change from the black and white. So you can see from that point of view the value of such material. They probably thought, well, we can't really use this again, So it had its limitations, and sadly, things are different now, but such is life.
Well, and Paul, and this is a very appropriate episode for us to get you in on, because The Reign of Terror is a story whose return you actually were involved in.
Well, that's right. The first letter I wrote was to the Cyprus Broadcasting Corporation, asking if they had any episodes. And I knew that they'd shown them because my relatives, my aunt and my uncle, who were on holiday in the UK, told me I showed them some clips, and they said, "Oh yeah, we saw this Doctor Who thing way back in the 60s." So I wrote the letter, and I got a reply back. I got 2 replies back from about 15 letters I wrote, and I got a reply back from Cyprus TV, and they said, "Yeah, we showed this in 1966, and we've got the following 13 episodes," and it was 3 of 4 episodes of the Aztecs story, all 6 episodes of the Censorites, and episodes 1, 2, 3, and 6 of the Reign of Terror. And this would have been in October 1984. And when the letter arrived, it was a massive shock. You know, I couldn't believe. I'd never expected them to say they'd actually got them. I'm not ashamed to say that I approached it in an entirely selfish way. I wasn't interested in getting them back for the fans. I just wanted to get them back for me to watch. And so I engaged my father, who was in Cyprus at the time. I said, "Can you go round to the TV station and see if you can prize these films out of them?" Which they agreed to, providing I could get permission from the BBC, which did scupper that slightly. And then a couple of weeks later, the BBC announced they'd found them in Cyprus because, purely by coincidence, they were sending telexes around. I think, though, that because I was playing the sort of the Greek card, because my relatives are Greek Cypriots, they actually did dig into the archives and the ledgers to find out what they had. I'm not so certain that they would have done that just for the BBC, you know, in all seriousness.
So the surname helped.
I think so.
In the interest of balance, because when you talked about this briefly on a Radio 4 documentary, Ian Levine felt that his part in the return of the Reign of Terror... I spoke to him on the phone, Ian Levine, who is a character responsible for various things to do with Doctor Who over the years, and he says he remembers having a ticker tape in his house and watching news come through of telegrams that they'd fired off, and he says that he recalls that he prized the Reign of Terror from Cyprus and brought them to the BBC.
Well, he may well have done, but he didn't find them before I found them. But I didn't recover them. I didn't return them to the BBC. I just found where they were. But that's part of history, you know.
Sure.
It's a historical fact. I've never said anything else.
I just thought I'd mention it, just so that I didn't get a phone call myself. Now, the episodes you found did not include this one, so what happened to this one?
Well, I went back to Cyprus TV personally a few years later because I was a bit annoyed that the BBC only asked for Doctor Who and didn't ask if there was anything else there. So I thought I'd go and find out if they had anything else, and also to find out what happened to episodes 4 and 5. And the guy that was there still had his ledgers, and he was able to tell me what flight number all the films arrived into Cyprus on and where they were sent to. So he was able to say that the first 3 stories, for example, An Earthly Child, Edge of Destruction and the Daleks, were sent to Ugandan TV, and Marco Polo and the Keys of Marinus were sent to Hong Kong Rediffusion. And that left the rest of them, the rest of the season was left in Cyprus. And next to episodes 4 and 5 and episode 2 of the Aztecs was a big red asterisk. And I said, well, what happened to these 3 films here? And he said, well, in 1974, during the coup, the TV station was shelled, and the main store where all of this material was kept was destroyed. And so all the foreign TV stuff, all of it was basically pretty much safe because it was in one of the basement rooms where it always was kept. But for some reason, these 3 films, The Reign of Terror 4 and 5 and the Aztecs episode 2, I think, or episode 3, were stored with all the cultural film in a separate store. So not only did we lose The Reign of Terror, but we probably lost the more important entire historical film record of Cyprus. So
war, what is it good for? Not the preservation of television archives.
Exactly.
So, Phil, I mean, a lot of this, because we've only got a short time, a lot of the early years, and Ian Levine's contribution must not be downplayed of bringing
Not at all.
episodes
Indeed,
back.
no, indeed.
But a lot of this is quite well documented, and there's an excellent book called Wiped by Richard Molesworth that anybody who wants to do further reading around this subject should definitely look into, and you've contributed to that, Paul. So those early years of the episodes coming back after Doctor Who magazine have been quite well documented. So where did you come into the picture, Phil?
I came into the picture probably around about 7 or 8 years ago when I met Paul, basically. And, you know, we had a mutual appreciation of missing episodes. At the time, I was employed working overseas on an offshore oil rig. Now, this took me to Africa. It took me all around the world, basically, Mexico, everywhere. But it did give me some time when I was on shore to check out certain facilities and, you know, on a one-to-one basis. So that was kind of the beginning of things on that scale, to, you know, to visit these places and see, basically, for myself, whether they actually still held anything.
Now, negotiation here must be a tricky issue because you're talking about stuff that we know, that, to us as Doctor Who fans, this is priceless. To the BBC, it's sort of their legal proper copyright, certainly.
Indeed.
And you've got television stations that have employees who might be curious as to why you would want something if it wasn't worth anything. So how much does
Toby,
that
you've got to remember something here. A lot of these black and white films were shown once or twice in the territories they were shown. So Doctor Who is an unknown there. They don't know what it is. I can remember going to one place, which obviously I can't mention, and I said, "Have you got any Doctor Who?" And he said, "Is it a medical drama?" And that, you know, and that's what you have to deal with. It's big in the UK, it's big in the US, it's big in Australia, but in other places it played once or twice, so it's not known. So basically, that's what you have to deal with.
So has that made your job easier or harder?
It's a difficult one. I mean, where we are now, if we come completely up to date, I run a company now, this is where the outcomes led me. I run a company called Television International Enterprises Archives, which I liaise with archives around the globe on a worldwide basis, helping them obviously keep their own material and keep it in a broadcastable format. On the same instance, I also am allowed, you know, to see what their holdings are, you know, whoever it is I'm visiting at the time. So that process, if you like, has it's opened a lot of doors which were previously closed on that front.
I see. So you provide a service, and for that you get access in a way.
Yes, that's probably more of a perk than anything else, basically, on that front. My basic job is to preserve archive material for future generations, be it, you know, in England or any country around the world.
Well, I was going to say, it's probably just worth pointing out the kind of things that you're up against when you go to these stations. When I went back to Cyprus TV in 1989, so 5 years after I wrote my letter about Doctor Who, I discovered there a room full of film, BBC and ITV material, a lot of missing programmes, including the first 7 episodes of Z-Cars, which were lost at the time, and another 5 from the second series, and a whole series of Bleak House from 1959, and so on. Hundreds of cans. But when I tried to get them back to the BBC, and this was going, by this time I was employed by the BBC, so it was going back officially, all the red tape came out. It was, oh, well, these films, we might still own the rights to screen them. Even if we don't, it says that we have to destroy them, so we can just destroy them. And I'm saying, well, no, you can't destroy them. I can tell you now that we want these films back. He said, yes, but the contract says this. And so, again, this is the difficulty when you're approached officially by the broadcaster that sold them in the first place. And that can be a real obstacle to actually getting these companies, these foreign companies, to open up. I'm sure you've had experience of that.
We have, of course, Paul, we have. As I say, we work in conjunction with the BFI and of course, the BBC. And the BFI are the official archive holders of all ITV material. So it's always with us. It is always on an official basis, and it's always on a give and take basis. We are basically there to help that station out. But you do have to appreciate the places you do travel around the world. It could be a war zone. A lot of places are very, very dangerous indeed. But it's, as I say, it's not a role I take lightly. It's something I've done a great deal of research into. And it's something I hope, while also helping, the stations overseas, it helps to maybe a small extent in, bringing material back. Of course, which quite recently I returned to the BBC, a 1963 edition of The Sky at Night with Patrick Moore and his good friend Arthur C. Clarke.
Which, by coincidence, Paul, is a programme that you know quite a lot about anyway.
That's right. I was the producer of The Sky at Night for just over a year, from 2009 to 2010. And the archive, I know a lot about the archive of The Sky at Night because of that, and it is decimated. So to find the one complete episode, I mean, Doctor Who fans know that if you wanted to find an episode of Doctor Who, there's always debate about what that one episode should be. But for me, it's episode 4 of The 10th Planet, because it's where the first changeover happened, and everyone wants to see that. Well, this episode of The Sky at Night is The 10th Planet Part 4 of The Sky at Night. It's the one that you would want to find.
So, Phil, tell me how that felt when you got your hands on that then. I mean, you were there at the coal face where you were getting that.
Like every tin of film, Toby, it was very cold and very dusty after 50 years in an archive overseas. I didn't initially know, the importance of it. It was only when it was cross-referenced with Paul that Paul said, this is, such and such, and it's an important, film. So, that's where, obviously the expectation was raised. So it was interesting. It's always nice to find something. I mean, I know personally it meant a lot to Patrick because obviously Arthur was his friend and he got to see his friend again, and that was the one programme that he wanted to see, so it was nice.
Well, and... we've been giving background information and all this stuff that is very useful to know, but I suspect everybody listening to this is going, ask them if there's anything more to find.
I will answer that for you, Toby. The answer is, a lot of people will say to you, I was always told over the years that, 8 years after 1978, you could find something. Well, I've just found, after 50 years, an episode of The Sky at Night. I'm not saying there's ever going to be any more Doctor Who found. I always like to believe, keep your options open. Rule nothing in, rule nothing out. I don't believe in a no-win scenario, if you like. Until absolutely everywhere has been asked and contacted. And plus, the way that my company works, the way that TIE works, we have a network of stations we're associated with all around the world. So if anything was ever to turn up, we'd get a call. There'd be a call, and it would be on its way back to the UK, and then it would be on its way back to the BBC. Have no bones about that. Everything that can be done, I can assure absolutely everybody out there, it is being done.
Now, this strikes me as a big sea change, Phil. We've not met before, and I followed the missing episodes thing, and it's usually sort of doughty individuals, using their own initiative. You strike me as a very business-like, sort of driven man who's started to coordinate something quite big and very professional, if I may say so.
Well, thank you very much, Toby. That's very good of you. I think it began with me as I looked at the whole situation. It stemmed from a lot of conversations and research I had with Paul going back and many other people at the time, that there was no, put Doctor Who to one side, the whole issue of archive television. I always thought, if you went to one of the great libraries in London and went in there and asked for a certain book, that volume of book would be there for you to do your research or whatever. We can't do that with television because of, obviously, that mistakes were made all those years ago in the past. Some for the right reasons, obviously, at the time. So I thought, if I can play my part, as well as assist in archives overseas to preserve their own material and get stuff back as well at the same time, then I'll have played my part. And we won't be saying 20, 30 years, isn't it a shame that we didn't? Because we did. We have, and we are.
Well, this is very interesting because as part of my build-up to this, Paul, I watched the documentary that's on the Lost in Time DVD set that was originally when the Ice Warriors came back, and they
Yes.
showcased those Australian clips. And they say 2 or 3 times, while it's unlikely that any episodes of Doctor Who will come back, and that seemed to me to be putting the lid on it, and people said, "Now look, come on, there is nothing out there." But do you seem more optimistic now than when that programme was made?
Well, I've always been optimistic about the possibility of things being out there, because I've never believed the story that the BBC and BBC Enterprises put out in the 80s, that they'd contacted all the stations and there was nothing else to be found, because that's basically the message that they allowed to get out there. And that was wrong. They may have sent telexes to all of these places, but they didn't always get a reply. And they didn't always, when they didn't get a reply, they didn't chase that up. So I don't believe for 1 minute that the idea that there's no programmes abroad of Doctor Who or anything else is a reasonable assumption to make based on what the BBC have said in the past. But equally, we get lots of returns, or we have had lots of returns from private collectors. Most recently, the episodes that have come back this year, 2011. They came back from a private collector, but they were sales prints that were probably thrown out of the BBC in the mid to late 70s, and ended up in a private collection.
Well, and yes, and they're not covered in the book wiped because they are. So tell us what happened with this latest find.
Well, a film collector called Terry Burnett had these films. He bought them at a Village Fete, I think, in Fawley, in Southampton, in the early 1980s, 81, 82. We don't know who had them, between them getting thrown out of the BBC and ending up at the Fete. But he bought them for a £5, I think, a box of film, and in it were 2 Doctor Whos. He didn't tell us he had 2 to begin with. He only told us he had 1. But he admitted to having the second one. Episode 3 of Galaxy 4 was the first one, and Episode 2 of The Underwater Menace the second. And what's interesting about these films is that they were the actual transmission films screened in Australia. They were the actual films. And we know this because the Underwater Menace film and the Galaxy 4 film had the ABC's codes on the front, so we know their episode numbering system applied on the front of the film. And also the Underwater Menace film has got bits cut out, which match exactly the censored cuts of the Underwater Menace episode 2 that we've had since 1996.
So does that make sense to you guys that
Yes.
it was transmitted in Australia and yet we find it in England?
Well, it does really. I mean, Australia, like a lot of other countries, sent returns back of programmes they'd had back to Enterprises, which were, as we know, clogging up hallways and archways and stuff like that. So they were thrown out. So to say that things, somebody, they went missing at the time, thankfully, I would say that people have retained things. It gives you a little bit of optimism to think, well, there could be other things out there.
Okay, well, Paul's 10th Planet 4, Phil, if you're in a cupboard somewhere in some foreign location, well, the words on what can would be the ones that would give the most joy to your heart if you found a Doctor Who?
If I found a Doctor Who, that's an interesting question. I think it would have to be probably Power of the Daleks.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed for that. Well, Phil and Paul, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Toby.